All right, welcome to another episode of The Breakout. I'm your host, Avi Gupta, and this is my co-host, Leo Shah. Folks, we have been on a hiatus, but that's because we have been planning a monster episode with another guest on The Breakout, our friend, Tyan Trin. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yo, so we've talked about Tyan so many times on this show. He is somebody who gives us so much content to talk about, so many trades, and honestly, so many hypotheticals to cover, across all the different moves you can make in Dynasty, all of the different strategies that you can play. Are you supposed to blow your team up? Are you supposed to invest in picks? Are you supposed to trade old guys? When do you do that? How do you do that? What sort of value can you extract? This has been a case study for us consistently throughout the show. So we would like to first off thank you for giving us so many different things to talk about. Why don't we jump into like our first set of questions for you? And Leo, why don't you take it from here?
Just to give our viewers kind of an understanding of your background, what got you into Dynasty? How long have you been watching football? And what's your like kind of everyday job like?
Yeah, so I just started Dynasty with you guys. So this is my first league. I just joined another with my friends from college and high school about a month ago, and we just had our draft the same weekend as this. But I've been playing fantasy football for about 5 years, and I've been pretty good at regular just redraft Dynasty or redraft fantasy. And this is my first experience in Dynasty, so I was very new to it. I didn't understand the different concepts. I've been watching football probably since I was young, I'd say. I remember the earliest days of watching the Seahawks was watching just Matt Hasselbeck taking us to the Super Bowl. And then I don't remember exactly what happened, but I feel like we got cheated just inherently as a Hawks fan against the Steelers. But then I sat through that. And then I sat through those terrible years with Tavares Jackson and Jim Mora from UCLA. I think he was the coach. And then right when Pete Carroll comes, it's a different era. But now it's not looking too good, but I feel good about the season. But I feel like I've been spoiled as a Seahawks fan. And then just for me, I'm a fresh grad out of college. I just graduated from the University of Washington in June, and I work in consulting.
Playing Dynasty this past year has kind of changed the way you look at football. Like, do you go after those Seattle Seahawks players?
I do not, because I know that Pete Carroll he is just frustrating to watch as a coach. And I think I would say like having like a player like Tyler Lockett who puts up like 45 one day and then you don't throw to him the next game because, we want to run the ball when it's not working. It's very frustrating to have Seahawks players on your team for fantasy. And it's also very frustrating to watch them play because we love to design the worst scheme possible to make the game as hard as possible. But, gets the heart rate going. It's good stuff.
So given, this is your first year that you've played Dynasty, how has the way that you've watched the game changed? Do you now pay attention to different teams? Do you pay attention to different schemes? How has your like understanding of the game evolved?
Two things I'd say. So I'll do a quick sort of for redraft. Last year we did individual defensive players. I just locked onto those players when I watched football, when my players were up. And then regards to Dynasty, I pay a lot more attention now to the offensive schemes, I think, and how good the offensive line is usually. So that's one of the reasons why I offloaded to get into it, James Conner, because I knew Pittsburgh Steelers, he was getting old, and I kind of knew that the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't want to like pay him. So I think playing Dynasty has made me realize the importance of looking at, where they are in their contracts, how much the team has invested in them, and then also like what they're doing to like have the right facilities for the player. So like with somebody like James Conner, he's on his last legs, and the Steelers didn't have an offensive line for him, in my opinion. So I needed to get rid of him. And so that'd be one example of like how I see the game differently for Dynasty.
So you're saying that when you were watching before, you were just kind of like paying attention to what was on the field, and now your understanding of the game has kind of evolved to paying attention to those subtle things that may not even come out in the stats. Things you're paying attention to the beat reporters trying to understand like the scenario around the players.
Yeah, I think honestly, you're when you're a dynasty player, you're almost like a mini GM, and you have to think about contract negotiations. I think you have to think about like who's a wide, like if your wide receiver is the second option on the team, how often is your quarterback going to be looking at the number one option? So for example, like I think somebody like Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley where Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones is probably going to retire soon. Not, I don't know, but like most likely, you know, he's getting up in their age. Calvin Ridley looks good. And then also I think Kyle Pitts looks good in that sense. So
Makes sense. So why don't we jump a little bit into how you approach Dynasty playing it for the first year? What was your strategy going into the startup draft?
I didn't really have a plan, to be honest with you. So I kind of knew that I kind of knew what players, like what skill position players were going to be good. I didn't foresee how important QB was in a two league dynasty. Like I really thought like the first overall player was going to be Saquon Barkley. And then when I texted somebody to trade up to 1.01 to take Saquon, he's like, yeah, I don't know why you'd give up so much for Mahomes. And I'm like, huh? And then I talked to number two, who the guy in the second draft position. He's like, yeah, I kind of want to stick with Lamar Jackson. And this was like the day before the draft. So I was like, I don't really know what's going on, but I'm going to wait and see. And then when two QBs went off the board, I was like, what is going on? Because I did not prepare at all, because I didn't know you guys at all before I joined this league, because we had a mutual friend who connected us. So I was like, you know, I'm just going to wing this and see what happens. I don't recommend that. I definitely recommend you do your research. But I think overall I had a pretty decent draft. I mean, taking Saquon at 1.04 is early, but I think later in the rounds, I realized what was happening and I kind of reprioritized and try to get a good QB.
So who were like the main players that you would identify, like were the good gets from your draft?
Let's see if I can look at the draft recap. I think getting Dak in the late second or mid to late second was a solid get. I think I got Kirk Cousins pretty late too, which was okay. It wasn't a bad pickup.
You mean Mac Jones?
Yeah. I think getting Darren Waller, I think I got him pretty late and he kind of popped last year. So I think that was a pretty good pickup. But like in terms of like after like round 10, like I had no idea what I was going for. And I didn't realize that, you know, they're kind of gold, I think, in Dynasty from what I've learned from this past season. So yeah.
It kind of seems like every time you do a startup draft and you look back on it, you're like, oh man, I wish I could have done this different. I wish I could have done this different. So then you go into another one, and then a year later you look at it and you're like, oh man, I wish I could have done this different. And it's just a never ending cycle of doing like dynasty startup drafts to try to fix the mistakes that you made previously. I don't think anyone ever gets it perfectly. But you're totally right that quarterbacks are worth their weight in gold in any super flex league.
Yeah. And I think it really comes down to like the length of time like a good quarterback can play. Like they can play for, you know, a good 10 to 15 years compared to like getting a running back. Like even like Saquon, I think like if he doesn't have a good year next year, I don't know what's going to happen, you know, because he's been so injured recently. But yeah, I realize now the importance of getting a quarterback. And so it gives you a bigger window, I think, to put a championship roster together. So yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that in the first year, and we've talked about Tyen's team on the show a couple of times in the past. In the first year, you kind of blew up your team, right? You traded away all your players, got a bunch of picks. You basically owned most of the first round of our rookie draft this year. How did you end up deciding that this was the right route to take? Like, when did you know that you needed to rebuild?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think because I didn't know you guys that well, and I wasn't that close to anybody in the league besides one guy. I was really unafraid of risking it all and rebuilding because there's sort of that disconnect. And so when Saquon got injured, I think it was like week 2, I knew I was not going to win the championship. And then Austin Eckler, I think, got injured in the same week too. So I realized at that point I still had good players on my roster, like Julio Jones, who was getting up there, and Darren Waller, who was putting up some real points. I think I traded him for nothing. But I realized okay, if you're not first, you're last in Dynasty. So why don't we just go ahead and tank and get Trevor Lawrence? And this is one of the best drafts I think we've had in years in terms of just value at the top. So I was just like, you know what, let's try to score the least amount of points possible. Let's offload every single good player we have for as many picks as possible. And that's sort of what drove it. Because when Saquon and Austin Eckler, your 2 RB1s, go down, it's like, bruh, what is this?
That makes sense. Was there like a moment where it like clicked to you that, you know, players like Julio were just getting up there in age? Like, did that kind of dynasty light bulb flick on and change from how you view redraft?
I think when Julio's hams, like when Julio was on and off, I think that's when I realized like, okay, this dude's getting old. Because those hamstring injuries, those are no joke. Um, so I think, yeah, I think I really want to get really young with my team at that point. But I wouldn't say there was like a really moment in time where it just clicked. There was just a moment where one of the players was like, "Hey, what do you want for like your four best players?" And I was like, "I want 3 firsts, 3 seconds, and 3 thirds." And then he was like, "All right, well, let me just find a third party." And then he found it within like 2 hours, and I was like, "Geez, that was fast."
I love how much people love to trade in this league. So, I think that's a really interesting perspective, because you're saying that, you view it from a perspective of, if I'm not in strong position to win the championship, my team should not exist as it does. I need to do everything in my power to like maximize whatever my window is, whether that means investing in players when you have a chance or blowing it up ASAP. Um, I think that's really interesting. My question to you is, what do you consider a long-term vision then? Because when you take a look at maybe what you did this year, I believe you had like 5 or 6 first-round picks, or something, half the first round. You got a lot of premium talent. Uh, do you think your team is ready to compete? If not, are you trying to buy players? Like, what is the long-term vision for the team?
I think the long-term vision for my team specifically, I think I want to challenge after next year's draft. Because right now I think I'm pretty set at wide receiver for the next couple of years, and I think they have a good lifetime. So like, for example, I picked up Metcalf, right, and then we have Waddle. I'm trying to remember my entire team: Devonta Smith, and Kadarius Toney, and then we also have Kyle Pitts at tight end. So I think I've got a good receiving core. The problem is I don't have any running backs right now, which is
Mm.
also good for me because I'm not going to be putting up that many points next year. So yeah, so I think my first running back is like Ahmed. So from the
Yeah.
Miami Dolphins, who might be the second running back. So I think after next year, I think I want to go for. I have 3 first round picks next year. So if I can get maybe 1 or 2 running backs there, I think we'll be in good position. And then the year after that, when those dividends finally pay off, I think I'll have a really solid like top 10 players we have.
So this is after the 2022 draft.
Yeah, I think by then, I think at that point, after the 2022 draft, I should hopefully have my eyes on the championship.
All right. I love to hear it.
And it's pretty interesting. A lot of the players that you mentioned, wide receiver wise, are players like, for example, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Kadarius Toney are all players that analytically they're not super strong.
Yeah.
When you approach that kind of off-season mindset of, okay, let me figure out who I want to draft, how did you approach it in terms of film versus analytics?
I love this question because I think you know how I'm going to answer this. So I get a lot of my football advice from the one and only Chris Sims. So if he told me the earth was flat, I think the earth is flat. I would probably go with it. Um, but I think I trust his judgment a lot more than I trust my own judgment. And I know I watched a lot of your guys' analytical videos. So with me, I think what I saw on film and what Chris Sims says, what I would just try to do is try to find the player in the best position for best bang for your buck. So I like Devonta Smith as a player, and Chris Sims says he's a great wide receiver. He's 166 pounds, which is tiny. That's like 10 pounds less than me. So there is worry there, but Jalen Waddle, like 1.06 out of the draft, like you kind of have to take him at that point if you can get him at 1.12 like I did. So I was just trying to get the best players for my money, and those guys are some of the most skilled players in this draft. So I mean, if they're busts, they're busts. But the good thing is I have more picks next year and the year after that. So I feel like the more chances I have, the better I can land on a good player.
Would you say then that you lean more film heavy than analytics, or like what's your like pie look like comparing the two?
I don't I didn't really look into the analytics at all for
Sure.
this
Okay.
draft. I did watch a few of your videos. But for me, I was just mostly the things I was looking at is how they are on film and how they're probably going to be used in terms of like what that offense likes to do.
Hmm.
And then also what Chris Sims says. So if Sims says this player is going to be a good NFL player, I mean, his guess is
Yeah.
better than mine. So
I got a couple questions here, like follow up here. Like, how did you end up finding Chris Sims and locking onto him as, I figure you listen to a bunch of people. You're a well informed guy, but Chris Sims is the guy who, like, over the last couple of months, he's the one who, you've been locked onto. Why him as a film guy?
for for me, it's low key a meme. Not gonna lie,
Okay. Okay.
because a lot of my friends like him too. But when he called like Lamar Jackson the best quarterback in that draft in 2018 over the other guys, I was just like, okay, if he's right about this, then I should probably listen to him. So then I
Hmm.
went through that, and then I went through the quarterback year before and the year after, and he's been pretty good so far. I don't think anybody's perfect, but I think Chris Sims as an evaluator, I really like what he says. I really like his segments too, and I like what he, I like that he goes against the grain. So I feel like if I want to do something different than other people, I should listen to Chris Sims too. So that's sort of how I fell on Chris Sims.
When you look at it in terms of a rookie draft, you owned like the majority of the first round, but you had picks spread out between 1-1 and 112. When you say going against the grain and kind of like if other people view Devontae Smith maybe a lot lower than you, do you wait on a player like Devontae Smith, even though you really like him, for a later pick? And how do you order the rookies that in which order do you draft them in?
Right. Yeah. So for me, for this draft, I thought there was a lot of talent at QB and wide receiver. And so for me, I also didn't want to pick up running backs too because their lifespan is a little short and I wasn't ready to challenge yet. So I had 2, 4. I'm looking at my screen right now. So I had 2, 4, 6, 10, and 12. So with 2 and 4, I knew that I kind of wanted to get 2 right quarterbacks because I thought this was a really good quarterback draft, according to my guy, Chris Sims. And then in the later rounds, I didn't really want to target running backs, but I was just going to get the best player available. So like, for example, at 6, I knew that it was either going to be Jamar Chase or Kyle Pitts because I knew what Avi was thinking. And I knew that we both had those guys, tier 1 offensive talents for sure in this draft. And then so at like 1.10, I knew that it was between Devonta Smith and Mac Jones because I was talking to Leo. And so I was going to get whoever he wasn't going to get for the best bang in your buck because Mac Jones, I think, was the second best QB on Chris Sims' list. So that's what I was thinking. And then at 12, it was either going to be Javonte Williams or Jalen Waddle, depending on what happened. So
you were going at it from a perspective of, hey man, my team is completely damn depleted.
yeah,
So whoever I can get, I like everybody in this draft or on the whole. So I'm gonna do my reconnaissance. I'm gonna figure out what people are thinking. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter to me what they choose because I'm good with the alternative. Like my team needs people.
yeah. There was actually a situation early on. So as we know, Trevor Lawrence went first. That guy took a lot of time, by the way. I think he got buyer's remorse because he was thinking Trey Lance. I swear he was thinking Trey Lance.
I
And if
can
I
I
could get,
can I can attest. Ben, I think Ben was thinking Trey Lance, but we'll find out when this episode releases. He'll text me after he sees this.
okay, all right, because I reached out to him too. And then so at 2 for me it was best player available. It was a combination of best player available, best situation, and for me it's got to be Trey Lance. And here's where it gets interesting because Justin Fields went 3rd. I knew that Aubie wanted Justin Fields, or maybe it was just smoke. So I was hoping that Reed would take somebody like Najee. And I texted him after saying, dude, Fields, really? And he's like, I actually meant to get Najee. So if Najee fell to 3, there was a situation where I was at 4 and Aubie was at 5. At 4, I honestly could have gone Jamar Chase because I knew that Aubie, he might take Fields at 5 if he's there. And then I would take Pitts at 6. And then to have Jamar Chase and Kyle Pitts, two of the best offensive talents in the past couple of years. That was in that situation, I would have gone 2 skill positions at the top 6 instead of 2 quarterbacks. And that would have been sick.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine how different your draft could have been if Sleeper simply had a like confirm button next to each of the draft things. For context, Reed had the 103 pick. and he accidentally clicked draft on Justin Fields, which, if we had a double check there, are you sure you want to draft Justin Fields? We could be looking at a completely different dynamic for what happens, because I have not seen any super flex draft where Najee has gone 103. So that is insane. That is really interesting.
Yeah, if Najee went 103 and at 104 I took Jamar Chase, what do you think you would have done, Avi, at 105?
I probably would have taken Fields.
Yeah,
I
and then
probably
I would
would
have gone Kyle Pitts.
well,
Right?
here's the thing, right? Like at 105, you are getting like in most years a QB1. So, it's kind of like, if you want to really think about it, 105 is a sweet spot. 106 is a sweet spot because you are getting either QB3 or 4, right? Which in most years would be a QB1. You're getting wide receiver 1, which is, normally would go the first 2 picks, or you're getting tight end 1, who is effectively a wide receiver. So you can't go wrong in this draft, which is why I don't think you saw much movement in these drafts besides the 104 to 101, because we agree that Trevor Lawrence at the top is like this insane value, and then everybody else is still tier 1, but a different version of tier 1. So I think that's really interesting insight. My question to you here is, how did you draft up your QB boards? Because we've heard a lot of different conversations around who people view as QB2, QB3, QB4. And I'm surprised that, Zach Wilson, for instance, wasn't somebody that you were considering at 102.
Definitely. So I was sort of playing a psychology game because I feel like everybody had different boards. So I knew that, with Reed, he was at 103, right? He already has Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson, Tua, and Baker. Like he's solid at QB. So I thought he wasn't gonna take a quarterback. So with 2 and 4, I think Wilson is the better thrower for sure. For over Trey Lance. But the reason I took Trey Lance is just because he's in such a good situation, in my opinion. And then you also have Zach Wilson who's on the Jets, and that can be trouble, just because it's the Jets, right? So I think in terms of skill and ability, I think I had Trevor and Zach Wilson at 1 and 2. But in terms of like situation overall, like risk versus reward, I think it was, for me, honestly, I think Trey Lance could be tied or even better than Trevor Lawrence at 1. And then I liked Zach Wilson over Justin Fields at 3 because I think, one, Zach Wilson is a better thrower. And I'm just copying what Chris Sim says. I think he's more technical. And also, I think Justin Fields in Chicago is also a worry too, just because I know Chicago is just a very interesting franchise. I don't want to talk any smack, but it's an interesting franchise. So for me, I think Trey Lance was the obvious pick at 102, just because best situation. He's a pure runner. He's going to get a lot of yards. And then what QB is going to come at 4? We'll see. If it's Wilson, I'll take him.
That sounds pretty sound. If you believe that, those quarterbacks are where they are, like the board fell perfectly to you.
So when people think of rebuilding, they often think of like selling all of your players for picks, which you kind of did. But you also traded out of your Trevor Lawrence pick because you had some conviction about Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, maybe, for DK 104 and the first next year. When you go into these kind of things, like Trevor Lawrence is a pretty solid pick. How do you make these tough trades and decide that that's what you want to do?
No, yeah, I thought I had that trade locked up in Sleeper for I would say a week, because I knew how good a player Trevor Lawrence is. Like he's the chosen one. Like he is like Anakin Skywalker. So it took me a while to decide, but then I realized, I feel like I realized that even if Trevor Lawrence is a great quarterback, which he could be, his fantasy points per game wise, he could be number 1, but then in the next year he could be number 9, and then the year after he'd be number 4. So I think because even Mahomes, his second year as a starter, he didn't have as good a year as his first year, and that wasn't that much different than the other ones. It's if the difference between I think the top 5 quarterbacks on a per game basis is probably 3 or 4. I don't know what the stats are on a per game basis, 3 to 4 to 5, and that's not too much to give up. So if I could get a player like Zach Wilson, who could put up fantasy numbers, or Justin Fields, who could put up fancy numbers, it wouldn't be that much different than having Trevor Lawrence in terms of just skill. But I mean, that doesn't speak to how good of a quarterback Trevor Lawrence is and how good of a leader he is and how he can lead Jacksonville to a title. It's just in terms of like points per game. Like, is there going to be a lot of difference between Trevor Lawrence and number 4 or number 2? There could be, but I'm betting on there won't be that much. If that makes
I think
sense.
this is a really good point to hit on, because, what we decide to do in fantasy is extremely different than what NFL teams choose to do. You're not looking for damn leadership on your team where you're trying to put up numbers. You are looking for the goofballs who are going to put up the most number of points, whether they win or lose. And I think that, looking at it, your decision to trade away Trevor Lawrence with the calculation that Zach Wilson could be your QB2 in this draft, and you could get him at 104, I think is a really interesting move that I think you could only really do this year, right? Would that be fair to say? Is that something you wouldn't do in another year?
Definitely. Because I made that trade after Chris Sims came out with his rankings, or it might have been
That's
right
true.
before, but I got super lucky. But then I also was considering the fact that, DK Metcalf, he could be a Hall of Fame wide receiver. He could be a guy who puts up Devontae Adam numbers. So for the value, I think I was on a per game basis, I was getting more value from getting Metcalf and, a person like Zach Wilson over Trevor Lawrence. And I think if Zach Wilson wasn't there, the second best QB, if that shocker for me from my idol Chris Sims didn't happen, I don't know if I could have gone through with it, because Trevor Lawrence is just that guy. But I think once I just thought about it more and I realized that I could get as good of a player at 2 or 4, who's not a chosen one like Trevor Lawrence is, I should just take this deal. Like, Metcalf as a floor. If my quarterback's a bust, he's a bust, but then I'll still get Metcalf in a 2022 first, which could still turn out great. So I think for me, it was worth it, just because there was still a lot of quarterbacks in this draft. And there was Metcalf on the table.
Yeah. Well, you finally got your Seattle Seahawks guy, so.
Yeah, until Russell Wilson gets traded next year. Oh my gosh. Constant worry.
So we're kind of like looking at your trades, and you've made a lot of different trades in this league, and oftentimes it's really hard to meet eye to eye with value with another team. And you made a lot of trades to push your rebuild along a lot quicker than it probably should have been. Like a typical rebuild might take 3 years or so, and you could probably do it in 2 years. How do you approach making trades with other people and negotiating and trying to find value?
So for me, I've always operated under the assumption that whoever's reaching out for the trade wants it more than the other person. So that being said, even in redraft leagues, I never reach out first, because I kind of feel like from a psychological point, you're at a disadvantage. Like, you got to let them come to you. And that's a common phrase, I think, for teenage guys trying to pick up girls. I don't know if it works. I never was that guy, but I think the power of like trades comes from whoever shows less interest initially. So for me, it was got Pandage, I think, was Alan. Yeah. Alan reached out to me to try to get Saquon, and I was like, I want to get rid of these players too. I want this loads of picks. If you can make it happen, let's try to make it happen. And then he went out and got it. So I assumed he really wanted Saquon, which is fair. So that's sort of my philosophy going into trades. And then that being said, I also really, as fast as possible, wanted to get the high scoring players off my team to get into 1.01 for the lottery, or for the location in the draft. So I feel like I've undersold a lot on my trades. But it still kind of worked out. So for example, like I'm looking at them right here, I traded Waller and James Conner for 2 guys I'm going to cut 1.08 and a second. And we didn't know it was 1.08 at the time. Waller is worth way more than that in retrospect. But I was still young to redraft, or still young to fantasy. So that was a clear undersell, but it's okay, because I got rid of James Conner. And then at 1.08, I turned that into 1.02, which turned out to be Trey Lance. So when you get it wrong, you get it right sometimes. And then I traded Dak Prescott for nothing, but I thought it was a lot. Like I traded him for a first, 2 seconds, and 2/3. That in retrospect is way underselling. Like he could go for 3 to 4 firsts in this league. But it's like I didn't realize how valuable QBs were in our league. I don't know if they're the same like that in other leagues. If you guys can speak to that, if you have fantasy history or if you have uh, dynasty experience, you can speak to that. But I thought I got a lot for Dak Prescott. Turns out I didn't get that much, but I think it still worked out in the end.
Yeah, it definitely varies based on your league economy. In some leagues, QBs are valued so much more than others. We're in a couple of other leagues that QB is valued a lot less than it is in this current league. So for example, if you're trading Dak for 4 firsts in this league, he's probably worth like 2 firsts in a different league. So I think understanding your league economy is also really important, and seeing the past trades and what deals people have made.
Do you think that earlier trades set the tone for the rest of the season, or for the rest of the league history, in all honesty?
Within reason, I think so. But as you've seen, all it takes is one massive trade to reset the market. I mean, like you can kind of think about it like NFL contracts. When a quarterback is paid $30 million a year, you're like, oh, well, that's a lot of money. Until you see the next guy get paid 35 million or 40 million. So at the time when you did the trade for Dak and you got 5 picks, people were like, holy shit, that is a haul, right? Like that was the first trade of that nature. But then, as we went on, we saw even more trades with, some of the values of the trades are a bit ridiculous. But I think that like on the whole, like today, we'll cover this in a different episode. Leo executed a trade where he traded Jalen Hurts and 2 firsts this year for Patrick Mahomes. And, like, I'm not going to comment on, whether that was a good or bad trade, but I will say that like that valuation, I personally think is in a completely different stratosphere than the Dak valuation, right? Like I think that if you look back at it, you off the bat, if you got 2 firsts for Dak, that is more than you already got for him,
Probably.
right? So I think that yes, like starting trades for a league help set the league economy, but you also have to remember that the people who are playing it are ultimately the ones who set it. So if you have a bunch of aggressive people in your league, they're going to be like, yo, I need Patrick Mahomes. I will give whatever it takes to get him. And then you might play in another league where people are like hit so hard by buyer's remorse that they're completely unwilling to move assets because they're scared of losing out on CeeDee Lamb or something like that, So, at the end of the day, understanding the psychology of the people in your league also helps influence what the economy can render. We know that you have a lot of strong opinions. We know that you love to digest content from all across the board. What is your favorite take that we've made so far? And what is one that you wish that, you could talk to us a little bit about?
I think my favorite take that you guys have is, didn't you guys say Kadarius Toney's going to be a bust?
Drew said that, but we don't disagree.
Okay, yeah. I think you guys are right, and I still took him because like you watch film, and dude, this guy is like Tyreek Hill and Kamara put together. All right, like he's got Kamara's balance, he's got Tyreek Hill's acceleration. So I had to take him at 1.02. Analytically, dude, though, like he is like another version of like Percy Harvin. Like I don't think this guy could be a great fantasy asset, but I still took him anyways because I love Chris Sims. And I love watching his film. Like he's just a fantastic player. I love that take. I think you guys could be right, especially with the Giants who don't know what they're doing, and they have like a guy who like could be like a D2 athlete at quarterback. And I don't think he's the quarterback of the future for the Giants. There is a high chance he's not going to be worth a lot. Like he could be another John Ross type of player, which is unfortunate.
Well, it was awesome having you on the show today. I think we learned a lot about how you have evolved as a player in Dynasty as a first timer, playing this through a year, understanding different trades, and now getting an understanding of how you evaluate players, how you evaluate other people in the league. And we're looking forward to more content that you're going to produce for us down the line. We'd love to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'll definitely come back in the future, and I'll try to trade as much as possible to keep you guys entertained. We'll see how this rebuild goes.
Maybe we'll have you and Ben on during a segment so that we can hear this little exchange around this trade. I feel like we got a basis for beef.
Yeah, I want to know what his thinking was at 1.01 and hesitated.
Future episode content right there.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. This has been another episode of The Breakout. I'm your host, Abhi Gupta, and this is my co host, Leo Shah. Let's hit that music.